Who's heard of A/B testing? Put your hand up here. Oh, thank God I'm in the right place. Okay, keep your hand up in the air. Who has run an A/B test? Good. Geeks. Good. Good. All right, keep your hand up in the air. Who in your current business runs at least one A/B test per day? Oh, okay, that's cut out a lot. How about 10 A/B tests a day? 50? Okay, I think all hands are down. So I'm going to talk today, I think everybody in this room, by the show of hands, you know what experimentation is, you know what A/B testing is. We'll get a little bit into the definitions of what I mean by it and how I think that it works. But the purpose of my talk today is really very simple. It's that you should be doing more experimentation. If you're not doing experimentation, you should start. If you are doing experimentation, you should be doing more of it. I come from a company previous to my work at Serco called Booking.com. It's this small Dutch company when I joined it. I was invited there by a friend of mine who I went to university with, and she said, you should come to work at Booking. They have lots of data, and I liked data, so I went there. And I worked on a number of different parts of Booking.com, including leading their experimentation efforts. And if you don't know already, Booking.com is one of the leading users of A/B testing and experimentation as a primary way of developing its product across the entire globe. And so I was lucky enough to lead the experimentation teams, data science, machine learning, and customer-centric data, where I and also my time on the Facebook Measurement Council and the Google Roundtable, Measurement Roundtable, I was able to learn a lot from many of these large companies that rely heavily on A/B testing and learn from them about what are the best ways to use testing, experimentation, data science validation as a mechanism to understand how is it that you build the best products. And so the purpose of today really is to take you through the parts that I've learned. So before I jump too far into experimentation, let me just talk a little bit about evidence in general. So not all evidence is created equal. Right? So I think all of you will know that you are constantly bombarded with all sorts of different measurement, all sorts of different metrics that are constantly being fed to you. And some of these are in conflict with one another. And so one of the most important things to do if you want to have a data-driven decision-making culture is be very clear about what is the hierarchy under which you are willing to say that something, a metric or a measurement, is more important than the others. I prefer to use the scientific method, which is there is the scientific hierarchy of evidence. In the scientific hierarchy of evidence, you essentially start at the bottom with opinions and case studies. Right? It's not to say that opinions and case studies are poor. It's not to say that they're bad. But especially when you have no other evidence, this is something that you want to rely on. However, in situations in which you have other evidence available to you, then you probably want to discount that evidence. Right? It's less reliable. And so as you work your way up the scientific hierarchy of evidence, getting nearer to the top is A/B testing, randomized controlled trials, experimentation, call it whatever you like. But this is where what we mean here is experimentation, A/B testing. Above that is meta-analysis. Meta-analysis was really only a thing that the biggest companies could use previously. This is something whereby you use statistical techniques to cut across very large numbers of A/B tests to understand what the true effect was across multiple different experiments. This was largely only really done in universities and in very big companies previously, but with AI and synthesized data, then this is something which is becoming a much, much bigger deal. But the point still remains, which is that in order to get to the highest levels in the scientific hierarchy of evidence, then you need to be running experiments, and ideally experiments on your data. And the reason why experiments are so important is because not only do they fall higher in the reliability stakes in terms of the hierarchy of evidence, but a data-driven approach where you rely on data above all else is it removes the hippo from the decision. Right? And this is, at my previous company, there was a saying which was kill the hippo, very crassly, kill the hippo. Hippo refers to the highest paid opinion in the room. So if you have the highest paid opinion in the room, if you have the shiniest title, if you have the highest rank, then often people will fall as part of business culture to bowing towards your superior knowledge, your superior opinion. The problem is that if you're only relying on opinions, especially hippo opinions, they fall at the bottom of the hierarchy of evidence. Very famously at Booking.com, I worked with Gillian Tarns, who was the former CEO, and she has this quite now famous quote, which she told the Harvard Business Review, that as the CEO, she would walk into a product team and say, I've got an idea as to how is it that you could improve your product. And the most junior product manager would turn around to her and say, that's nice, but we're going to test your idea and find out whether you're right or not. And this is because this is this idea of killing the hippo. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what your rank is. The people with the most reliable data are the people who get to make the decisions. So in order to make a culture of data-driven decision-making, then you need to have a number of different things. It can't just be one single thing. I think a lot of people think, I'll just roll out a new data stack. I'll just roll out an A/B testing tool and all is done. But in actual fact, you need a number of different things. You don't need all of them, and you don't need all of them in perfection, but you need a little bit of every one of these 5 steps, in my opinion. You need data literacy. It doesn't matter whether you're an executive, a product manager, a designer. You need to have some kind of understanding of data and how data works. In addition, you need good data infrastructure. We all know the saying of crappy data in, crappy data out. It's the same thing here. You need to have good infrastructure for your data to be produced, consumed, and stored. You need to have a business culture which embraces the data-driven nature of decision-making. And you need good tooling. We've got a whole series of sponsors here who provide tooling and very reliable tooling in order to be able to make good data-driven decisions across your business. And finally, you need really good metrics. You need to have a very clear set of metrics that drive your business, and you understand how they work and how is it that they are driving the outcome of your business. You don't want vanity metrics. Right? You could have the perfect A/B testing setup in the world. You could have the best business culture in the world. But if you are just optimizing towards vanity metrics, you're not going to get anywhere. I worked with a company once that were trying to compete with Nike and Adidas on apparel that they were producing. And one of their principles, their guiding principles as a business, was to be beautiful. They would always produce beauty above all else. And they adhered to it all the way through to their product development. They were going all the way through the product cycle to produce apparel that was intended to compete with Nike and Adidas, and it failed, and they went out of business. And it's because they weren't producing products that were functional and useful for their customers. They were beautiful only. They went into distress. They were taken over. A scale-up took them over and bought their business at a fraction of the price of their peak valuation. Took them over, turned them into a conversion-led organization. So in other words, not only building beautiful products, but optimizing towards what is it that customers want. And sure enough, they took off, and they're now a successful company competing with the big players. So getting into experimentation then, experimentation is perhaps the worst kept secret in building online tools. And it's because the biggest companies in the world all use it. They all tell you that they use it. They produce all of their materials online. They show you how is it that they build their products. And that's because it really is it's not that difficult to run an experiment. It is difficult to do all those things that I just said on the previous slide, right? You want to have a very strong culture. You want to make sure that you have removed the hippo from the room. You want to make sure that you have all the best metrics. Once you have all of those things, then you're able to apply experimentation relatively simply. And the experimentation industry itself is actually exploding, right? It's a growing industry. There's all sorts of A/B testing tools that you can get your hands on. When I worked at Booking.com, we made all of our own tooling. So all of our own A/B testing tooling was made from scratch. And that's because no one sold it, and no one could do it at the scale that Booking was running experiments. These days, that's not the case. These days, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of tools that are available for you all to use. But the point here is that what all of these companies would tell you, and all of these companies are based on a heavy experimentation culture, is that it's not just about running experiments, it's about running a high volume of experiments. Why is that? Well, the main reason is that humans, and I hate to tell you, product managers are really bad at having good ideas. Right? So all these things that we think are really good ideas for our product are not necessarily good ideas. And what experimentation shows us is that you fail more often than you're successful. And companies that don't do experimentation are simply rolling out all of these bad ideas on a continuous basis. Right? So what the key thing is that what experimentation can give you is the ability to very quickly learn what is working, what is not, and discard the ideas that are not working. And the discarding of the bad ideas is as important, if not more important, than accepting the ideas that are the good ones. So, just to be level set, everyone, I think everyone put up their hand when they said they knew what A/B testing was. I'm very, very glad about this. I used to walk into these rooms in previous years, and a lot of people did not know what A/B testing was. But a lot of names are used in product development. We talk about validation, testing, experimentation, and sometimes they mean the same thing and sometimes they don't. When I'm talking about experimentation, I'm meaning the scientific definition of experimentation, right? And what this means is you take a group of eligible users for your product. This might be a set of mobile users or customers in the United States or people who have previously made a purchase. And they are eligible for the product development that you are making. And you take a randomization tool. This is perhaps the most important part of the whole process, is you randomize people into two groups. If you are not randomizing, you're not experimenting. Right? So you randomize people, you put them into a control and a variant group. Right? So the control group get exactly the product that you have in your status quo without any changes. Your variant group get the change that you are testing, get the thing that you are trying to find out whether it's a good idea or not. And then you measure. And you measure folks in both sides of this. Now remember, this is random. Right? So your two groups of people you're in your A and your B, the only difference between them, because you randomized, the only difference between them is the fact that A got nothing and B got your new idea. And so as a result, you can split everybody into these groups. There's everyone here who just doesn't behave differently. There's a whole bunch of people, no matter if they're in A or B, they're just going to behave exactly the same way. There'll be a whole bunch of people who will behave differently despite the experiment. Right? So in other words, they'll make a purchase regardless. Right? They're shown here in orange. Right? A whole bunch of people will make a purchase regardless whether they see your idea or not. But then there'll be a group of people who make a purchase just because they saw your experiment. Right? And this is an indication that your experiment worked. Right? You've now got scientific evidence that you have an uplift, or what we call incrementality, an uplift in the purchase behavior in this example, caused by the idea that you had in your experiment. Okay, so this is what we mean by experimentation. And experimentation run in this way is by far the gold standard of the hierarchy of evidence. So if there is any evidence that flows from this type of methodology, then you are fairly confident, it's highly reliable evidence that you are right. Right? It's much better evidence than guessing. It's much better evidence than a hippo having a good idea about something that they thought about in the shower that morning. So, I don't think we have many executive people, the ivory tower executive that sit on top, or board members. Often you have to bring them along on the journey, and you have to convince them experimentation is a good idea. And this slide is aimed at those people. So if you want to convince your organization of what are the commercial benefits of experimentation, then tell them this, right? Experimentation gives you competitive advantage. It allows you to remove the guesswork from what you're producing, and allows you to know that the ideas that you are rolling out, you are doing them better and they are working for your customers. And as a result, if your competitors are not doing this, you have a significant competitive advantage over them. It's an excellent use of capital efficiency. Right? With experimentation, what you can know is you know what's working and where it's working, and point all of your people at those things. The worst thing that you could be doing is peanut butter spreading all of your resources and people across all of your ideas, which we know, many of which are not good ideas. Right? So with experimentation, you're pointing your people to the ideas that are most likely to work and most likely to be driving the outcome or the business outcome that you intend. And experimentation is controlled risk. So what you're able to do is test very big ideas, big bets, things that could bring the whole company down, but you could very quickly know whether it's working or not. And when it's not working, you can very quickly stop. And when you're able to stop, then you're able to protect the business from that risk. One of perhaps the best feature, I said earlier that Booking.com builds all of its own A/B testing tooling. One of the best tools that exist inside of Booking.com A/B testing is what's called the kill switch, which is where if you launch an experiment and something breaks, right, where you get a distribution of breakage that is different across your A and your B, it will turn off that experiment within 500 milliseconds. What this means, because I don't think we have many engineers in the room, but what this means is that we've all worked with those engineers, 4 o'clock on a Friday, they'll push out as much code rollout as possible, and then head off to the pub. Never happens. I can see people saying, no, never happens. The beautiful thing about this, about things like the kill switch, it will instantly stop you from being exposed to the risk of rolling out those changes. So even though that is something that could potentially have damaged your business, it's something that is protected. If you hadn't run it as an experiment, you might not even know for hours or even days, in some cases, that a bug has been introduced. But this is all well and good. This is all for your ivory tower leadership. Tell them that this is what experimentation is about. But this is a group of product developers. And what you care about is the customer. How many of you have a company value or a guiding principle in your business about customer first, put the customer at the center of everything you do? Yeah. Some of you may have a chief customer officer. It's because you all care about the customer, right? Most businesses do. Most businesses do care about the customer. Well, here, if you take home nothing else, take home this. Experimentation is customer centricity. It's exactly the same thing. It's the closest thing you get to knowing what's going on inside the head of your customer. What I mean by this is that we can measure customer behavior in all sorts of different ways. We can measure it with UX research. We can measure it with surveys. We can measure it with how much revenue we make as a business. And we can measure it with experimentation. And what we have found in our experience working in some of the big companies in the world is that experimentation is directly linked to all of those things. All of them. Right? So much so, at Booking.com, for example, they don't measure CSAT or NPS anymore. They only measure experimentation conversion rate as their sole measure of customer satisfaction. And this is because there's a lot of scientific evidence to suggest that when customers are unhappy, they stop purchasing, and when they are happy, they purchase. And in experimentation, and through experimentation, you can see that in almost real time. In most of the other methods that I've told you about, it's very difficult to see that in even near to close to real time. And so, as a result, experimentation is a direct measure of your customers. And so if you want to take the pulse of how your customers are feeling, run an experiment. They'll be able to tell you instantly through their clicking as to how is it that they feel. So, what does this mean? Well, if you do want to fold experimentation into your product development lifecycle, this is something that you want to do. You may be doing a bit of A/B testing today, but you want to increase it. One of the key things that you want to do is you want to turn this into something that is incredibly easy to rotate constantly as a product development team. And what I mean by that is some of you might recognize this. This is despite what your CPO might tell you, or despite what some of your lead PMs might say, is that quite often something like this waterfall approach to building product is quite often what people follow, right? We make a plan for the quarter or the year. We go into a whole series of discovery, right? So we talk to customers, we do desk research, we gather lots of information. This can go on for some months in some situations. We might we might even build an MVP. We call it an MVP, right, at this stage, by which time we can be months through the year at this point, by the time we go through planning, discovery, building, and then we go to validate. And at this point, quite often what can happen is that we discover through our validation techniques that customers don't like what we're building. And what does the CFO say? What does the CPO say? often in those situations, especially in New Zealand companies where capital is short, time is short, they say, roll it out anyway, keep going. We've already wasted 9 months of resource on this. It's too late now. It's on the plan. We've told the board it's going. And you launch. Right? And at that point, people test. Right? And they test and they say, well, let's make a story about how it looks good. And in some cases, quite often, what you'll see with people building online software, with building software development, this can take months at a time, or even a year, like up to a year, to go through this entire cycle. And so quite often, it's at a point whereby you don't know until it's too late that you've been working on the wrong thing or going in the wrong direction. Now, many of the techniques that David's already outlined will help you avoid this. So even if you do stick to the waterfall effect, read David's book. It has many techniques that will help you avoid this type of error. But one way that I would like to purport to you, which would also, in addition to David's book, help you, is to roll out an A/B testing culture as part of your product development lifecycle is something that is just innate, and it's something that rolls and happens on an ongoing basis. Right? So pretty much these are the same stages on the left and the right-hand side, except I've drawn them in a different shape, like a true strategist. The key difference between these two is the hypothesis generation. Right? So one thing that you would do, if you want to get into an A/B testing culture, you want to have A/B tests being at the center of the product development that you do, then what you really want to be able to do here is turn this product development lifecycle as fast as you humanly can. And what that means is that by a continuous getting insight, building a hypothesis, having an idea, building the easiest way of testing the assumption, launching that test, and then doing the whole thing all over again. Now, I'm talking here about weeks, not months. Right? So, again, a very good example of this is there was a famously said in an article about Booking.com is that, and Booking.com's in Amsterdam, so no one drives a car, everyone's on a bike. Everyone rides their bike to work. And there is a famous quote from one of the designers that said, I have an idea quite often, I will have an idea on my bike on the way to work. I'll talk to an engineer about it when I arrive. We we ideate and have an MVP live. We launch it by lunchtime, and we start getting data by that afternoon. This is the type of timescale that I'm talking about, right? So when I asked you, how many experiments are you running? And I think we peaked out at 10 and maybe 50 experiments a day being launched. Booking.com runs 5,000 experiments a day. Right? And this is why. Everybody in their product development is turning this circle as fast as they humanly can. Every single code release is released as an experiment. Right? And so when we say that this is hypothesis-driven, what we mean by this is that everyone who gives a talk on experimentation talks about buttons. Yeah? It's the classic experiment. You have a green button and a yellow button. And it's almost as if people dismiss this type of experiment because it's a bad experiment. It's not a bad experiment. What we mean by this is that it's bad if you don't have a good hypothesis. So very simple product optimization. You often hear people just go, I wonder if green buttons make people book more. That's not hypothesis-driven, right? That's not a good use of an experimentation resource. Instead, if you have a good hypothesis that, for example, you believe that darker imagery is more likely to affect your highest value customers because we've seen this through various types of evidence through research, then we believe that we're going to see more engagement when we show people a green button. This is a hypothesis-driven approach. And if all of your experiments in that cycle are constantly hypothesis-driven, that they're based in something that you believe based on a data-driven decision, then you're more likely to get a valid experiment about the things that you want. And so much so that this is a LinkedIn post from a former colleague of mine, Erin, who used to work at Booking.com, and she's got this stop shitting on button color testing. She's a senior designer. She's a big fan of button color testing. The point of her post, if you read into it, it's many paragraphs long, is that button color testing is completely fine as long as you are hypothesis-driven. Right? If you have a very good hypothesis about what you're trying to achieve, then that is more important than the experiment itself. Okay, so what do I mean by a good hypothesis? Well, a hypothesis looks something like this. Take a photo, or I can send it to you. This is really not secret stuff. If you've ever worked in a scientific lab, this is bread and butter. This is what they teach you on day one when you're running scientific experiments, is that you need to have some kind of idea about what is it as the framework that you are trying to test, and why is it that it tests the thing that you believe. So for example, you might say that I believe that a feature for this particular audience segment will achieve some kind of benefit, right? Will make them feel valued, will make them make a purchase, right? Will make them, will satisfy their needs. For the business objective, which is we will successfully, so if we are successful in this theory and validation, then we will observe an outcome on this metric, right? So we will see an increase in purchase behavior, for example. So if you get all of your people, so when I talk about the designer who's riding their bike to work in booking.com, this is how they're instantly thinking. They're not sitting on their bike saying, I wonder if a button's going to make people change their behavior. They're sitting there saying, I believe, based on that research that I saw yesterday, that darker colors are more valuable for our high-value users. They like the higher contrast, and that will have a benefit of them engaging with our product. So therefore, if successful, we will see more engagement or more purchase behavior with our product. So one thing that comes out of this then is that people say, well, that's all well and good. That's great, Matt, good stuff. Run experiments, run lots of experiments. And that's all well and good when you're optimizing like the roundness of a button or the color of a button. But it doesn't help us launch big stuff. Well, and this is where I depart from that way of thinking. In actual fact, I believe the exact opposite. So I believe a combination of having very clear overarching strategic thinking. In this case, I'm giving the example of design-led thinking, or you can think about this as customer-centric thinking, whereby you have a very clear articulation about what is it that you want your customers to experience. Now, you're going to be wrong in that articulation, right? This is your big grand idea. This is the big product that you're launching in order to solve a specific need. And then what you do is you get your teams or team. You can have either one team or one person or even hundreds of teams all working towards this idea in parallel, all running the product development lifecycle at the highest rate possible, right? So testing the smallest assumption, launching, testing whether they're right, getting more insight, having another hypothesis, and keep going. And the faster that this can be turned, the more likely it is that you'll actually achieve your optimal design-led thinking. Okay? So, here's the take-home message. If you're not experimenting, start. Right? The best time to plant the experimentation tree was 50 years ago. Next best is today. If you are experimenting, run way more experiments. By running lots of hypothesis-driven experiments, you are far more likely to be successful. By running lots of experiments, you are far more likely to take risk out of your business, get rid of bad ideas, and promote the ideas that are good ones. It's the worst kept secret in product development. Thanks, everyone. Thank you very much.